Prince Harry just dropped another verbal grenade, and this one might have scorched whatever was left of the royal olive branch in a brand new interview that's already got palace walls shaking. Harry opens up again, and this time, it's not just about his usual targets. It's about the monarchy, his father, King Charles, and how he sees his role in the whole royal saga. The guy may be in Ukraine doing charity work, but somehow it's what he said about his family from a moving train that's echoing across Buckingham Palace like a war horn. So let's start with the big headline. Harry claims once again that his conscience is clear. Yep, even after Spare the Oprah interview, Netflix drama, security lawsuits, and years of royal mudslinging. The man insists he feels no guilt. According to him, he wasn't airing dirty laundry, he was just correcting the narrative. That's his story, and he's sticking to it. But the timing, that's where things get murky. Because just days before, he'd been seen reconnecting with his cancer-stricken father, and now here he is, basically saying, yeah, I'd do it all over again. Bold move, Harry. But he wasn't done there. When pressed on whether he regrets airing his grievances so publicly, his answer was a firm no. He doubled down, insisting the memoir was the only way to tell the truth. And truth, in Harry's words, isn't meant to be softened. He still doesn't see Spare, or anything else he said, as harsh. But the fallout paints a different picture. Palace sources are reportedly furious, branding the interview as tone-deaf and disrespectful, especially with King Charles's health now front and center. And then came the jab, or maybe not so subtle depending on how you hear it. Harry said the focus this year should be on his father. He wants to spend more time with King Charles. On its own, not shocking, but layered over his words, it almost feels like he's underscoring just how serious the king's condition could be, whether he meant to or not. It almost feels like Harry is planting a public reminder that time could be running out. Some might see that as caring or even responsible, but palace insiders are calling it downright cruel. One senior royal source said Harry acts like repeating these stories helps, but in reality, it just twists the knife. And that sums up the mood inside the royal inner circle. Every time they sense Harry might be softening, he drops another media bomb that drags everything back into chaos. Even his defenders are uneasy now, because you can't keep talking about reconciliation while tossing out verbal grenades every few months. But from Harry's perspective, this isn't revenge, it's accountability. He says he's not trying to hurt his family, but to stop the press from smearing him. In his mind, the only way to change the narrative is by keeping it alive. Still, the contradiction is hard to ignore. He insists he's done with the fight, yet every fresh quote feels like another jab at the hornet's nest. And honestly, by now, even the most patient royals must be out of stingers. Meanwhile, Meghan barely came up in the interview. The only reference? A past comment where she said the most efficient way to live is by telling the truth. And Harry seems to have taken that advice to heart. Whether his truth is completely unfiltered or shaded a little is up for debate. But one thing's certain, he believes every word. That conviction, that unshakable sense of righteousness, may be the very thing keeping this royal rift alive. For Harry, the truth doesn't just set you free, it sets the whole house on fire. The optics of his latest appearance didn't do him any favors either. There he was in Ukraine, front and center with his Invictus mission, posing near war memorials, meeting wounded soldiers, and speaking about resilience. On the surface, it's a noble cause. He's pushing for new recovery programs, helping prosthetic athletes, and planning sports facilities for veterans across Ukraine. But the timing of his interview had critics raising eyebrows. Was this truly about the mission, or another carefully packaged PR moment dressed up as good intentions? Because let's be real, Harry knows how to command a camera, and the media seized on it instantly. The walking stick, the somber train rides, the reflective moments at memorials, it all looked perfectly staged. Hard not to wonder if every step was crafted for maximum narrative impact. The irony is hard to miss. Harry says he hates stage photos, insists he doesn't play that game, but that doesn't mean the message isn't carefully managed. With every quote and every snapshot, it feels like he's building a version of himself for the world to see, principled, misunderstood, and completely unbothered. In fact, he doubled down on that very word, unbothered, calling it his strongest marker of success. Then came the not-so-subtle flex, claiming he's quite Ukrainian in attitude. According to Harry, locals embraced him because, like them, he does his own thing. That line alone had eyebrows shooting up. On the surface, it sounds humble, but to critics, it oozes ego. And honestly, it's classic Harry, framing himself as the rebel with depth. But then he reached for Princess Diana's legacy again, saying he gets it from her. That's where the emotions cut deep. People loved Diana because she was authentic, not because she declared herself to be. And some believe Harry leans on her memory too heavily whenever he needs public sympathy. As for his emotional state, Harry swears he's fine. Despite the headlines, despite the family tension, he insists he's not just content, he's fulfilled. He says the press gets it wrong, painting him as miserable and lost. In his view, that's fiction. He claims he's at peace with where he is and who he's become. But whether that's defiance or denial, there's no mistaking the frustration under his words. After all, you don't keep defending your happiness so loudly unless you're trying to convince someone, maybe even yourself. And then there's the press. Harry doesn't just mention them, he fixates on them. He sees the media as the main villain in this entire saga, accusing tabloids of controlling the narrative and being out of touch with real British people. To him, they're the reason reconciliation feels impossible. They're the reason he's seen as bitter, angry, or ungrateful. That sense of betrayal runs like an open wound through everything he says. Even his lawsuits against major British outlets are framed not as personal battles, but as principle. In Harry's eyes, this isn't about revenge. It's about reform. He wants change. He wants accountability. He wants to hold the press to a higher standard. What Harry doesn't seem to realize, or maybe just won't admit, is that his constant talking fuels the very cycle he claims to hate. Every fresh interview becomes tabloid ammo, every soundbite a new headline. He says he wants peace, yet he keeps feeding the fire. The palace, meanwhile, is said to be beyond frustrated. One insider described his latest remarks as a gut punch, especially the comments hinting that time could be running out for King Charles. Others say the family feels blindsided. They offered a small opening for reunion, and Harry barged through it with cameras rolling. For a family that lives by the rule never complain, never explain, his approach feels like betrayal all over again, and the pattern is impossible to miss. Harry insists he wants healing, but every time he opens his mouth to explain himself, the cracks only seem to deepen. Whether he's aware of it or not, his words keep widening the very rift he claims he's trying to close. Harry's rewriting the rulebook, but he's doing it with a sledgehammer. His latest claim that truth must come before reconciliation might sound noble at first. But when that truth is filtered through his lens, it feels more like a reason to keep the spotlight on himself. That one line, "You cannot have reconciliation before you have truth," has already set off fury behind palace walls. To the public, it reads as a call for honesty. To the royals, it's an accusation. It suggests Harry sees himself as the lone truth-teller, the righteous voice in a sea of silence. And that framing doesn't open space for dialogue. It just points fingers. Inside the palace, the message landing is clear. Harry still sees himself as the victim, and he still expects the monarchy to admit guilt before peace is even possible. And then, there's the timing. These comments dropped right after a rare and fragile reconnection with King Charles, who, according to reports, is facing a very serious illness. Harry's latest public remarks strike many as emotionally detached, even opportunistic. A line about life being precious, a vague nod to wanting more time with his father, and then silence. No warmth, no affection, no gratitude, just strategy. That's how insiders are reading it, and it's not difficult to see why. Adding fuel to the fire, Harry once again defended Spare, calling it necessary, truthful, and absolutely worth it. Even after the backlash, even after the family fallout, he insists he'd do it all over again. But that book wasn't just a memoir. It was a public execution of private memories. Stories about William, jabs at Camilla, painful family moments that weren't his alone to tell. To Harry, it might have felt cleansing. To those written about, it felt like betrayal carved in ink. What's more jarring is how Harry separates himself from accountability. When asked how the public sees him, he deflects. If people say he's stubborn, he calls it principle. If they see him as bitter, he blames media manipulation. In Harry's eyes, the fault never lies with him. There's no reflection, no pause to consider whether his actions, even if well-intentioned, have caused harm. It's always someone else's fault. And yet, in the same breath, he claims he feels supported by the British public. That's a tricky statement. Sure, some still admire him, but a growing portion of the public sees him as out of touch, overly sensitive, and, ironically, obsessed with how he's portrayed. It's hard to claim moral high ground while flying private from charity trips and monetizing family wounds. The contradictions are stacking up, and people are starting to notice. At the end of the day, Harry's biggest problem may not be the press or even the palace. It might just be his own mouth and the way he keeps fueling the fire every time he speaks.